everybody, Andrew here. I want to start by reading a poem by a man named Rudyard King, and it's called If. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor too wise. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything in it. And which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Amazing. So in order to understand the role of ideals in our lives, we first need to define what they are. Ideals are those high standards of beliefs or behaviors that we strive to achieve, even if we know we may never fully reach them. We're not 100% sure that they're going to happen, but we're 100% sure we know we want them. They're not just an abstract concept. They're visions of who we want to become, the principles we hold dear, and the goals we pursue with passion and perseverance. In order to make this point a little bit more concrete, I'm going to take my boy Plato, going to take him out of history, going to dust him off, and pop him in this podcast. I have a quote from him that I'm getting AI to speak because it'll sound cooler with a British accent, even though Plato wasn't British. So let's get going.
Virtue is the desire of things honorable and the power of attaining them. We ought to esteem it of the greatest importance that the fiction, which children first hear, should be adapted in the most perfect manner to the promotion of virtue. Remember our words, then, and whatever is your aim, let virtue be the condition of the attainment of your aim, and know that without this all possessions and pursuits are dishonorable and evil.
Plato reminds us that ideals are not just personal aspirations, they're the foundation of a just society. They're the virtues we teach our children, the standards by which we measure our actions, and the aspirations that shape our communities. It's super important, and I have a really great clip. I don't know if you've heard this, but it's so powerful. It's JFK talking about why we need to go to the moon. And so this was a time in our history when America and Russia were in this Cold War. They were building up these piles and piles of nuclear weapons, showing off to each other how powerful they were. Nobody was sure if we were going to all just die in this nuclear war. And he really felt like us going to the moon would show them that we are superior and kind of break their spirit. That was the general consensus. And so he was galvanizing support from the nation. And he was talking about, well, let me tell you what he's talking about, not by me saying it, but by me pressing play.
There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
JFK's words encapsulate the idea that striving for high ideals, even when they're difficult, even when you know it's going to get uncomfortable, it's essential for progress and leadership on a national level. This is about pushing boundaries and achieving greatness through shared vision and effort. And so ideals are so important for the individual, for families, for communities, and even for nations. And I want to bring this to pass with a great quote from a Jesuit priest. So the Jesuits it's like an order of really hardcore priests who love Jesus. Their official title is the Society of Jesus. And this guy, his name is Reverend Pedro Arrupe. And again, I'm going to get AI. I'll find another voice to give you this quote so that it's not just me saying it, so that it's some nice voice. So let's get into it.
Nothing is more practical than finding God. That is, than falling in love in a quite absolute, final way. What you are in love with, what seizes your imagination will affect everything. It will decide what will get you out of bed in the mornings, what you will do with your evenings, how you spend your weekends, what you read, who you know, what breaks your heart, and what amazes you with joy and gratitude. Fall in love, stay in love, and it will decide everything.
This is a beautiful and poetic way of looking at an ideal because it's choosing what you want to fall in love with. So if you want to put a healthy, vibrant relationship with God as an ideal that you're striving for, then that is choosing that you want to invest your love into God rather than in frivolous falling in love with money or something like that. These are all how you can use ideals to fall in love with life again. It's a wondrous thing. Now I want to play a clip for you that is probably one of the most epic clips I've ever heard in my entire life. It's a soundbite from Martin Luther King Jr. and not the one that you think, not I Have a Dream. I fell in love with Dr. King when I started to build a relationship with God because I could see that this man loves God so much. And so I listened to all of his speeches, and I can't find one that gives me goosebumps quite like this every single time. This is the last speech that Dr. King gave before he was assassinated. Somebody had already tried to kill him. They, I believe, stabbed him. And he was getting death threats more and more and more. And he just knew that his days were numbered. And instead of crying about it or cowering over his own self-pity, he decided to shout like a lion from the mountaintop and say, "I'm not afraid anymore." And I'll explain to you why this is such a relevant speech when we're talking about ideals.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
So amazing, right? And the reason I included this clip was because he mentions Russia and China as being exempt from this example of like, they haven't committed to a certain set of ideals and principles. So if they had slavery over there, he wouldn't hold them to the same standard. But America does. They have these things called the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And as far as he's concerned, Dr. King, he was saying that, aren't we going to live up to these things? And it was such a powerful statement because he's not accusing or judging anybody. He's just holding up the virtues, the ideals that the founding fathers created as the spinal cord of our society and said, are we still committed to these? That is the power of ideals, is that you never have to feel judged by your ideals. When you hold them up, you say, merely, do I want these still or not? That's the question. And if my actions are not aligned with this, then there's something wrong that I need to deal with. Otherwise, if I still want them, then it's time to get back to it. So it's important to talk about when ideals go wrong, because even the most principled individuals can fall short of their ideals, whether those ideals are personal, cultural, or religious, or to do with your sexual integrity, right? People want a linear path. They want to just be fully recovered. When a lot of people join high noon programs, they think, oh, I'm just going to take this for 3 months, deal with all my problems, graduate, and then I'll never have to think about porn or masturbation again. When in fact, these are deeply rooted problems, and very few people that I've ever seen have a linear path towards sexual integrity. There are many ups and downs. It's a journey, right? And these deviations from the original path, from your ideals, can occur gradually and often unnoticed as small compromises lead us further from our original ideals, right? So we've talked about the power of ideals and their role in guiding us. But what happens when we don't live up to these ideals? It's important to have a healthy relationship with our ideals, even when we fall short. So first of all, I want to talk about religion, because religion is super important for society. It's helped us to navigate through very difficult times. It's brought entire segments of society together under the banner of Jesus or under the banner of Muhammad or whomever, right? And so they've been really good at providing us with a very lofty set of ideals. And our faith in the FFWP world, the Unificationists, the Family Federationists, the Heavenly Parent Holy Communityists, we people have the highest ideals. We want world peace and we want it now. And we know that we are a part of it, right? But what happens when you fall short? Well, it can be very difficult. And I just want to play you some clips to show how ugly it can get.
His is the compassionate public face of the Catholic Church. But today, Cardinal Vincent Nichols faced calls for his resignation after a scathing report blamed him for failing to tackle decades of abuse. The report highlighted 3 of the worst offenders: priests who repeatedly abused children, but whose crimes were covered up by the church for many years.
The whole truth, and nothing.
Cardinal Nichols appeared before the inquiry last year, but they concluded he was unwilling to take responsibility. Today, he told me he was humbled by their report and wanted to say sorry. You are the leader of the Catholic Church in this country, and yet this report says that your personal failings, your personal lack of responsibility, and it talks about you not showing compassion. That's an appalling catalogue for somebody who's head of the Catholic Church.
Yes, and I'm very aware of those phrases, and actually those phrases refer in the main body of the report to the way I was handling 2 cases, just 2 out of hundreds.
What appears to be being said in the heart of this report is that you and others in the church have valued the reputation of the Catholic Church over and above the suffering of these children.
Well, I know that's what's said, and I know the actions that have been taken in the past can rightly give that impression. I do not believe there is a contradiction. I believe there are failings on our part. Failings. It was slow. And it was slow for reasons, but, that's not the point. I think we've got there, and I think we've done a good job.
But it is the point to a lot of people that you were dragging your feet, that you appeared not to realise how insidious, how damaging this whole thing was to the church and to the victims. They're the most important people.
They are the most important people, I agree with you.
One of those victims, seen here as a choir boy with his alleged attacker standing behind him, is calling on the Cardinal to resign. He spoke to us anonymously.
He can pussyfoot around and say that the Pope or he's been asked to stay on, but he should really hold his hands up and say he wasn't up to the job and was thinking too much of the Church as a reputation and step down immediately.
Cardinal Nichols did offer to resign, but the Pope has asked him to stay and oversee the changes that are so urgently needed. Juliet Bremner, News at 10.
I was a happy child. I was an artist.
I loved to go to school because I wanted to be with my friends. But unfortunately, something came along.
Then I just sort of erupted, and I just blurted out. I was abused.
If they commit a crime, you look away.
Une fois, je t'ai touché, c'est tout.
If a priest is allowed to go 20 to 30 years, there are several hundred victims per priest.
Give us the time to think about it.
Father, do you have time? When there are vulnerable children, do you have time?
We have cases every day of the week where they're simply moved and put into ministry without telling anyone.
Do you know who this man is?
Luc.
Luc Delft? We've spent the whole morning looking for Father Delft. It's been a bit of a wild goose chase, but now we're hearing that he's back at his office, and we're heading there now. Hello, Father Delft.
Yes. No.
Rome in all its grandeur. St. Peter's Basilica lights up the sky. All around is postcard perfect. But behind the high walls, turmoil roils the church.
How do you get to be a bishop and you gotta be given an education about the rape of a child?
They know better, but they're not doing better.
The Pope has called a summit to discuss clerical child abuse. Bishops from around the world grappling with the scale of the tragedy.
Files that could have documented the terrible deeds and named those responsible were destroyed or not even created.
An unprecedented admission. Abuse survivors gather to be heard, demanding justice and change. The Catholic Church issues new guidelines, but survivors say they don't go far enough. There are some worrying grey areas. You may think you know this story, priests abusing children. But there is something you may not know. There are powerful institutions within the Church who are free to self-police. In many cases, not even the Pope can sanction them. The religious orders, the Jesuits, Benedictines, Franciscans. Powerful, wealthy, and secretive. But according to experts, victims, witnesses we spoke with, there is one order that stands out as among the most defiant, most unrepentant. The Salesians of Don Bosco. the second largest order in the world, and whose very mission is to help vulnerable children. In a year-long CNN investigation through Europe, Africa, and across the United States, we found a pattern of behavior which saw many of the Salesian Brotherhood protecting each other, moving alleged abusers from place to place, country to country. In some cases, allegedly threatening whistleblowers and victims. Across continents, across decades, an order meant to protect children, but too many times hurts them instead.
It wasn't just the one priest, it was several of them. They covered for each other.
There's a bigger problem because how many times has he abused in the last 40 years?
Two men separated by over a decade of time, but each's abuse and betrayal bleeds into the other's.
Lawyers say that when their client was a student at Richmond's Salesian High School from 1969 to 1973...
Local television coverage of a shocking case.
And in their lawsuit filed yesterday, they say other clergy at the school knew about it.
In the late 60s, early 1970s, the Salesian High School in Richmond, California was a hunting ground for a ring of pedophile priests. A self-protecting cluster. An anonymous victim, John Doe 17, filed a lawsuit that was brought in 2003. John Doe 17 is Joey Piscatelli.
I was kind of a happy child. I was an artist. I went to a Catholic grammar school. I got straight A's for 8 years.
When did that start to change?
We were going to play pool, and the priest, who's the vice principal, he sat down at the bench, and he said, "You shoot." And I said, "Okay," and I shot the ball. And I turned around and told him, "It's your turn." And I looked at him, and he was sitting there masturbating. And I remember I turned all red, I started sweating, the hair on my neck was standing up, and I just stood there frozen. I didn't know what to do. And he said, "Keep playing now, I want to watch you." And then I turned around, and the head of the boys' club, Brother Sal, was watching this, and he just stood there watching. He did nothing.
Joey Piscatelli drew to cope with the abuse, his pictures becoming more vivid and violent, mirroring the nightmare he was living, a nightmare that only got worse.
This went on for about a year and a half, and then one day he cornered me on the stairs and started molesting me and told me to get upstairs to the all-purpose room on the third floor of the school, and he dragged me into the room and attacked me, and I was raped, and I passed out and blacked out while that happened, and I just totally lost sense of what happened after he started attacking me. When I got home, well, I don't even know how I got home, but when I got home, I had blood in my underwear. So I went in the backyard of my house, and I wrapped the bloody underwear around a rock and threw it over the fence into the field to get rid of the evidence or whatever. It was so disgusting, and I knew I had been raped.
According to Piscatelli, he was threatened when he reported it to a staff member.
The principal of the school, Father Bernard DeBenny, who's now a convicted molester, told me that he was going to kick me out of school and fire my mother from the cafeteria because I have a big mouth.
Threats and intimidation by the Salesians, a pattern you will see throughout this investigation. The Salesians fought Piscatelli's lawsuit at every turn. Like in these court documents, when they argued that Father Whelan, masturbating in front of a schoolboy, is acceptable if deemed funny. In 2006, Piscatelli won his case and was awarded $600,000. But more than that, he won public recognition of the appalling wrongs he'd suffered at Salesian hands. Father De Bene, the principal who threatened Piscatelli, also had a history of abuse. Over a decade before Joey Piscatelli started Salesian High School in Richmond, it was a Salesian seminary. It was where a teenage George Stein first met Bernard De Bene.
I know it's not easy to retell or to relive this, but could you tell us a little bit about what happened in your sophomore year at the seminary?
Sure. You want me to talk about abuse or violation?
Only if you want to. Only if you're comfortable doing it.
Sure, I can do it. He basically hugged me and kissed me, and that was inappropriate, and I wasn't expecting it at all. And I told him that this happened and I wanted it to stop. And for me it did. It stopped. He remained there for the rest of the academic year, and then he was reassigned.
But he was reassigned to another school?
Yes.
Much later, Stein discovered the true horror hidden at the seminary.
At our 40th anniversary of our graduation from high school, a third to a half shared that they'd had occasion to be molested or to be approached.
That's an extraordinary percentage of people in that room.
Yes, it is.
The church says so much of this horror is in the past, but it's not. Only last year, the LA Archdiocese had to remove a Salesian priest from working within its school system after becoming aware of sexual abuse allegations dating back 40 years. Allegations that the Salesians had failed to act on. Patrick Wall was himself a religious order priest, and to date has helped to investigate hundreds of clerical abuse cases.
The Salesians are silencio. They have refused to put out anything unless it's with a court order or unless the civil authorities force them to do something. In my experience has been that the Salesians have the highest percentage of perpetrators of any religious order across the world because of their focus.
That focus being the betterment of the lives of children, which includes creating and teaching at schools, youth camps, clubs, and missionary work. The Salesians of Don Bosco, now a worldwide organization working in more than 130 countries, helping millions of children. But as our investigation across 3 continents found, not always protecting them. Coming up, Benjamin Katobo fled his home in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, but his demons followed him.
Une fois, je t'ai touché, c'est tout. Et je le regrette, et pour ces une fois...
Benjamin Katobo with the taped confession of his abuser. Capturing it was the start, he says, of taking his life back.
J'ai fait une erreur.
The man on the tape, Father Omer Verbeke, a Belgian priest stationed in Katobo's then home of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in Africa. But it wasn't just one time. Katobo says it went on for years at the seminary where he was a teenager, studying to be a priest in the 1980s.
He says, I don't understand. I repent to God. What more should I do to ask forgiveness? How did that make you feel? How does it make you feel?
Oh, that's disturbing.
From his home in St. Louis, Katobo filed a claim against Verbeke in Ghent, Belgium, where Bishop of Ghent, Lucas van Looy, a Salesian superstar, took over the handling of the case. Katobo was awarded compensation and says Van Looy promised him Verbeke would no longer be around young people. As Bishop of Ghent, Van Looy had oversight of Verbeke, and he failed to keep him in Belgium, failed to keep him away from children.
In 2014, you had discovered that he had set up an orphanage in Rwanda, and so, of course, was around children. Did the Bishop of Ghent respond to you?
Yes, but the response was just two lines. Yeah, we do have a monitoring system for suspected pedophile priests here.
Van Looy refused CNN's request for an on-camera interview and insisted he repeatedly imposed a travel ban on Verbeke, but admitted to us Verbeke had ignored the ban. Verbeke is not a Salesian priest, but as we left St. Louis, it was clear to us that senior Salesians such as Van Looy are in positions to affect the handling of abuse allegations, even in the case of non-Salesians like Verbeke.
Before leaving the aircraft, take a quick look around your seat. Make sure you have everything you brought on board.
Through our investigation, it's becoming clear that even as the Pope recommends universal principles of conduct, the orders, the Salesians, continue business as usual.
We're in Ghent, in Belgium, because so many of the allegations lead us back here.
Bishop Van Looy was not just involved in the case of Father Verbeke. There were many other cases, like Father Luke Delft. Father Luke Delft, a dormitory supervisor convicted in 2012 regarding previous abuse at a Salesian boarding school in Ghent. Yet again, there was an opportunity to stop an abuser, and yet again, the Salesians failed. Spurred by concerns, Delft could still be interacting with children. Two of the boarding school victims agreed to speak with us.
I was 12, so everybody was 12, 13 years old. And suddenly, at night, someone was trying to pull off my blankets.
The day after, I remember I told one of my best friends that I had a really weird dream involving getting touched in places which were weird.
And at the beginning we were laughing about it because one of the kids told us, yeah, I had like a dream and I came in my dream, but afterwards, yeah, we heard the horrible facts. So yeah.
And the next night, I woke up again, and then I realized I was really awake, and then I felt, someone touching my legs and my genitals, and also, giving me oral. I don't know how to say it.
It was Father Luke Delft, a dormitory supervisor at the school and a rising Salesian star. CNN has learned Delft was moved by the Salesian order after being confronted over the allegations. He was sent to work with a number of different schools in Belgium. Then, the Salesians sent him abroad to one of the most vulnerable countries in the world.
Do you know who this man is?
Father Luke Delft was, we're told, marked for greatness. Charming, intelligent, expected to rocket up the ranks of his Catholic religious order, the Salesians of Don Bosco. He was also a serial paedophile. In 2001, Delft worked as a bedroom monitor at a Salesian boarding school in Ghent, Belgium, when he sexually assaulted two boys, aged 12 and 13 at the time. After a few nights of this ordeal, one of the students struck up the courage to speak to someone they trusted.
One of the victims...
Wim Hansens was the deputy director of the boarding school.
There was no moment in my mind when a child comes to tell you this, that it happened.
You believed him immediately?
Yeah. The day afterwards, another boy came to me and told me the same story.
At that moment, I wrote down on a paper what these kids told me. I called Luc Delft. I show him on the paper what these children told me. And first he said, I just caressed them. But when I let him read that he touched the genitals of those kids, he confessed, and I asked him to sign this paper, which he did.
A signed confession. Hanssens asked Delft to leave the school and made sure the Salesian order were aware. Hanssens says the Salesians promised him and the parents of the boys that Delft would never be around children again. CNN has learned that this promise has been repeatedly broken as Salesian leaders in Belgium moved the confessed paedophile priest from one school to another and allowed him to travel abroad. Ghent, St. Peterswallowo, Haiti, India, and supervising children on a school trip to the Congo.
De jongens verwittigden na het misbruik de
In 2012, Luc Delft was convicted for the abuse of children in the Don Bosco dormitory, to which he had confessed in 2001. It was only when a former staff member finally did what Salesian leaders had not, reported Delft to the authorities.
Feiten getuigen van een volkomen gebrek aan respect.
During the trial, it was also revealed that he had twice been caught with child pornography on his laptop. Delft received a suspended sentence. His restrictions clear. No interactions with children for the next 10 years. Were he to break these rules, he would face a new trial and possible imprisonment. Hanssens says he paid a high price for speaking out against the Salesians.
They can break you. And they broke me. So yes, I had to leave because I'm like a kind of danger, according to them. Although I think they should be grateful. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened to those victims.
He says he was blacklisted from Salesian schools in the area after reporting the inappropriate behavior of a number of priests. The Salesians deny his accusation. Time and time again, we have seen a pattern of behavior by the Salesians to systematically move known pedophiles and to intimidate those who want to protect children.
It's always the system. Move that person to another place and we'll see.
But once convicted, would the Salesians really risk giving Delft access to children again? We set out in search of Delft. Much of what we know about his movements are from his own social media posts. Our research is zeroing in on a remote town in the Central African Republic, Kagabandoro. So that's where we're heading. The only safe way for us to get to the town is on a United Nations humanitarian flight.
It's taken us about 2 days, 3 different planes to get up here to the north of the Central African Republic. If you were trying to disappear, this would definitely be suitably remote.
UNICEF has called it one of the worst places in the world to be a child, falling to the bottom of the UN Human Development Index. A shaky peace deal is barely holding. United Nations forces on constant watch. The day we arrived, the threat level is almost at its highest.
When Father Delft arrived here, part of his work involved caring for families and children forced from their homes by violence. Incredibly vulnerable families and children.
The young training to be altar servers. The Catholic Church has a strong presence in this community and throughout the country. 4 years ago, the Pope came and blessed the Christians of the Central African Republic. Hundreds of people celebrating. In the crowd, we spot Luke Delft.
C'est dommage pour le dire, mais il n'y a pas beaucoup changé.
And in this promotional video for Caritas, the Catholic Church's relief agency, he's even featured as a key director for the agency. Delft was sent here by the Belgian Salesians, well aware of the court restrictions on him. The Catholic compound in Cagabanduro. Right behind is a school. This is where the Caritas office was and still is. This is where Luke Delft was based. Caritas here under Delft was in charge of looking after internally displaced people, providing food, education, and medicine. We have been told that it was during this period that Delft was once again abusing children. Our local producer has found the family of an alleged victim who may be willing to speak with us.
It's proving really difficult to get people to speak to us on camera. People are really afraid. We're going to jump out here and try one last time.
Elle est vraiment désolée pour cette situation. Si vous voulez pas, votre fils ne parle pas, vous pouvez également dire un petit truc sur cette situation.
As we drive away, we pass the burnt-down courthouse, a reminder that there are no real avenues for justice here. Next, a race against time to track down this known paedophile.
We've spent the whole morning looking for Father Delft. It's been a bit of a wild goose chase, but now we're hearing that he's back at his office, and we're heading there now.
Choir boy leads the congregants in song as the Pope oversees a Mass at the Vatican celebrating the work of Caritas, the Catholic Church's relief charity. We found Father Luke Delft, convicted paedophile, among the congregation. Head bowed, he accepts the Blessed Sacrament. As director of Caritas in the Central African Republic, Delft traveled freely, attending this service only a month before we would try to visit him. We've heard that Delft has continued to abuse children, but so far, no one is willing to speak on camera. It's here in Cagabanduro that Delft first worked for Caritas, the Catholic charity. Their mission? To protect the most vulnerable. It's also here that we're hearing whispers of possible new victims. Finally, a breakthrough. At the local displaced camp on the outskirts of town, Albin and his father agree to speak to us.
Do you know who this man is?
Luc.
Père Luc?
Nalisa kamalo. Lu bokanambia bongo. Kami papa lu muka minja. Siganda ngumbi bakalu, lugari okana kwa bakalu inali inja. That's I mean.
He became your friend. What happened?
Shonel sasu. Meso kumba futuro kisuko ene vemene vengo. Mibanga visage lunga kagama para mibazo. Pa ene mingi.
It's clear Albin is too upset to talk much more. So we asked his father if he can explain what happened.
What did Father Delft do?
Okay, iso saso akan junap. Meaning getting the agawad love. Meaning getting the agawad love. Awal akan mingi, the pretty award. Meloboti meaning getting the montalo. I'm a pretty the camena. I eat a lot meloga abi. Amula to what it jigate. It was so on the cagata saban mawa. Melokilo to Mako Mingit Lamonazo, akan junap.
That was clearly really tough for both Alban and his father. But we had to show them this picture. We had to know that the man that Alban says abused him is Father Luke Delft. What happened in there clearly came at such great cost for both of them. But it was something that they told us again and again they needed to do, because justice is not easy to get up here.
We leave Cagabandura. It's time to track down Delft. This is Bangui, capital of the Central African Republic. We've traveled here from the north where we met Alban. Caritas Centrafrique's headquarters is here. Sunday, and we get an early morning wake-up call. Our contacts are telling us he regularly celebrates Mass in the area. We try the churches. He's nowhere to be found. We try him at his residence, but he hasn't spent the night. Nothing.
We've spent the whole morning looking for Father Delft. It's been a bit of a wild goose chase, but now we're hearing that he's back at his office, and we're heading there now.
Hello, Father Delft.
No. We spoke to the prosecutor in Belgium. We'd like to ask you some questions about breaking the terms of your sentence. We also spoke to some children up in Cagabandura who had some really disturbing stories to share with us. And of course, we want to hear what you have to say about it, Father Delft.
Nothing.
What do you mean, nothing?
Nothing.
You're a priest, you're a man of God. These children are accusing you of abusing them, and you have nothing to say for yourself?
No.
Do you know Alban? Do you remember Alban? He said he was 13 when you abused him. Do you remember him? Alban? Alban, in Cagabandura. At the compound, the Catholic compound. He and his father spoke to us. He was crying. He said that you told him you loved him, and then you hurt him. You've nothing to say.
No.
It doesn't disturb you to hear that children said this about you?
No.
Do you want to say anything?
No.
Well, we will, of course, be speaking to the managers of Caritas about our findings. Thank you for whatever this was. He had nothing to say for himself. He was utterly blank. He didn't care. He did not care. He didn't remember. You could see it in his eyes that he didn't remember that little boy's name. The things that that little boy told us, the bravery that that little boy showed in speaking to us, and that man in there didn't remember him.
We travel back to Belgium to share the evidence we've gathered with the Salesian Order. Maybe we can get answers here. Father Carlo Lutz has been handling allegations of child abuse for the Flemish region of the Salesian Order for almost a decade. The Order's work with young children, he tells us, complicates the question of where to relocate abusers.
That's one of the greatest challenges, what to do with abusers. We have to move them to another place, but we don't have so much alternatives.
So specifically in the case of Father Delft, as you remember it, how was it handled?
He abused two members of the boarding school in Ghent. He was at that moment immediately removed from the boarding school. The decision was clear: no direct pedagogical contact with young people. So he became a coordinator, administrator of a center, vocational and educational training in St. Peter's Woluwe.
St. Peter's Woluwe, which is a school, though. So the center is housed within a school.
Yeah, but separately.
But there were children on the campus.
There were children on the campus, yeah.
Eventually, Delft got into trouble again.
He was found with child pornography on a laptop that he had had access to.
Yes, yeah.
Were you aware that in 2008, Luc Delft went on a school trip with children to Lubumbashi in the Congo?
When you say it to me, yeah.
And yet, still, the Salesians sent him to the Central African Republic, where CNN found his latest accusers.
What will you do now with Father Delft?
We have an advisory commission about cases about sexual abuse, and for us these are new facts, and I will bring together that commission, and there we will discuss how to handle concretely, but at least give us the time to think about it. When people...
Father, do you have time? When there are vulnerable children, do you have time?
But at least we met first Friday, now it's Tuesday, and now you proved me that there are new cases, so also you took some time. So we will not take time in the sense of months, of weeks, and a very short time I will bring people together who can help us what has to be done concretely and what will be the most appropriate way to handle.
You've been handling child abuse cases now for 8-9 years.
Yeah.
How is that? How does that feel?
It's a shame.
But shame doesn't help the survivors we spoke with. We traveled to the Vatican for answers. CNN has uncovered a blind spot within the church that allows religious orders to self-police. One order, the Salesians, have used this blind spot to protect their own, putting the brotherhood before children, putting lives at risk.
We came to the Vatican to share the evidence that we were able to unearth over a year-long investigation. Evidence of abusers being moved, evidence of a refusal to defrock abusers, evidence of lives being destroyed. But many of the key institutions refuse to even speak to us. And that doesn't give much hope for the Church's commitment to transparency and change.
How is it that even presented with evidence, allegations of a convicted paedophile's continuing abuse, Father Luc Delft was not immediately recalled from the Central African Republic? Caritas Internationalis' new head of safeguarding says the Salesians did not contact them about the current allegations against Caritas' former director, Luc Delft.
So you were only made aware when we contacted you?
Yes, and from what information you shared with us, there are new allegations there which need to be investigated, hopefully by the police or at least internally by the church, to take action against Father Luc and any other person who is responsible for Father Luc's behavior.
And in order for that to happen?
We need to have systems at work. We need to have people that follow the systems, and when the systems are not followed, there needs to be consequences.
Yet again, the Salesians appear to have withheld information from others in the church. We are still looking to understand how this is possible. But the Vatican says things are changing, and they are encouraged by the new papal guidelines issued just this year. Father Hans Zollner is on the Pope's Commission for the Protection of Minors. He was one of the few people who agreed to talk with us.
This is a very important step forward in the development of a culture of accountability.
Does this apply, though, to the holy orders? Because the holy orders will not directly fall under that bishop.
Now, the congregations and the religious orders follow a different type of structure and legal procedures. Many people think the Catholic Church is a monolithic block with one CEO who is the Pope, and he presses a button and every bishop and every priest and every Catholic actually salute and they follow what he does. And that is not the case. In some cases, in way too many cases, the religious superiors did not follow through canon law.
But the fact is they did not follow through canon law, and there was no oversight mechanism that made any note of that. So there are no sanctions. There have been no sanctions for that.
If there are no sanctions within the community, which is in that case an order or a congregation, then there is almost no possibility to do that.
An order that is almost untouchable, even by the Pope. Religious orders like the Salesians are left to act with almost no external accountability.
When you put the institution first and not the people for whom you serve, then that is the biggest problem.
In the centuries of its existence, this is the heart of the battle within the Church. Could these new papal guidelines make a difference? The way they're written makes it unclear how they will even be applied to religious orders. Survivors tell us it's impossible to have faith in a church that isn't holding everyone equally to account. Meanwhile, they're the ones left to struggle with the hurt.
Now to that scandal that brought down a Christian TV empire. 30 years later, 2020 has a special look at the televangelist Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker. Amy here with that story. And Amy, you also took a look at what Jim Bakker's doing now.
That's right. Well, he could have been in prison right now. He was sentenced to 45. He only served 5, and so he is out, and now he is back in front of the cameras.
I'm talking about end times. Oh, I've got powdered food.
It's the talk show that describes itself as a daily broadcast featuring prophetic and biblical revelations brought to light in today's world. But take a close look at the host. He may look very familiar.
Welcome to the Jim Bakker Show.
It's Jim Bakker with closely cropped hair and a white beard, looking markedly different than his days as a household name back in the 70s and 80s. Bakker, along with then-wife Tammy Faye, quickly rose to stardom with the Praise the Lord network.
I'm asking you to start giving and just see what happens in your life.
But the couple suffered a very public downfall in the late 80s. Jim caught in a sex scandal.
All I could tell you is it certainly was not an affair. Okay?
Her version is pretty horrific. And in today's Me Too movement, it probably could have resulted in criminal charges. Now, if you believe Jim Bakker's version of it, it was a consensual liaison.
The Bakkers lost control of their PTL empire. Allegations of fraudulent fundraising led to a federal indictment for Jim.
Jim Bakker was found guilty on all 24 counts of wire and mail fraud and conspiracy.
Tammy filed for divorce before passing away in 2007. Bakker appealed his sentence and was released from prison after serving just 5 years. Now, Jim Bakker's back on TV.
If the power goes out, we believe in being ready for anything.
I guess you'd say, Jim and Lori, help me be prepared today.
Once again, spreading his faith alongside wife Lori.
He's back on TV talking about salvation and Jesus and selling a lot of stuff.
Now, actress Kristen Chenoweth, who says she grew up watching the Bakkers, as all of us did on TV, is now developing a musical based on Tammy Faye. That's something I'd go see.
Yeah, this is a big scandal. I remember this to this T.
Remember the mascara?
Oh, yeah. And everyone else can see a lot more on 2020 Tonight. The special is called Unfaithfully Yours. That's at 9 Eastern.
Now to the shocking accusations of sexual abuse at a Buddhist temple in Santa Ana. 8 women have now come forward saying that they were assaulted as children at the temple. They say the temple had a culture of abuse. As Eyewitness News reporter Jessica DeNova tells us, a criminal trial is set to begin on Monday, and there is a lawsuit.
Really needed somebody to protect me at that time. I thought it was just me.
The tears, pain, and trauma these 2 women share are all too familiar for Ivy fam. Tina Le and T. Win say when they were young girls, the head monk of the Bat Na Buddhist temple in Santa Ana sexually molested them. Their story empowered this 26-year-old to speak out.
This isn't the first time, I'm giving my inner child a voice. I'm standing up for her.
Ivy says when she was just 11, a youth leader at the temple, a man in his 50s, grabbed her breasts.
I was just in shock and I was frozen. I couldn't move. And then I felt his penis just on my back.
Feeling ashamed, it took Ivy a while to open up to her mother. Ivy says her mom reported this to the head monk. That's Tich Win Tree, the same man Tina and T are suing. But Ivy says the head monk did nothing.
I did see the monk not taking action to remove him at all. That infuriated me.
2 other women spoke with Eyewitness News Thursday with similar accusations against the same youth leader. They're considering going to police and hope their stories bring awareness.
Because it's not just for me, but it's just for other people as well. I hope this kind of guides young girls or boys to speak up if this incident ever happened to them.
We've learned more details about the criminal case. The women originally went to Santa Ana police in 2017, but the suspect wasn't interviewed by officers until 2021. One of the officers assigned to the case in a deposition by opposing counsel admits it's because the files were misplaced. The case was then filed with the Orange County District Attorney's Office just this past summer, more than 5 years after the women originally reported this to police. We're waiting to hear back from the police department and the DA's office whether this had anything to do with their criminal case being rejected.
I know it's rough to hear that, but what ends up happening in many cases is when you have these high ideals and somebody betrays those ideals, it feels like you just want to either get rid of the ideals or get rid of that person rather than understand that this is a constant push and pull of give and take, right? It's crucial to recognize that failing to live up to ideals doesn't invalidate the ideals themselves. Instead, it highlights the human struggle to reach those high standards. This failure can be a powerful opportunity for growth and reflection. But we don't always do that because a lot of times it's just so emotional that we have to either give up our ideals or give up on ourselves. That's typically what we do. And it's not healthy. And we'll get into that. As we strive to live up to our ideals, it's inevitable that we'll face setbacks and failures. The real challenge lies not just in setting high standards, but in dealing with the pain of failing at meeting them sometimes. I want to talk a little bit about this phenomenon, because failing to meet our ideals can be deeply painful. It can lead to feeling shame, guilt, and disappointment, but it's crucial to remember that failure is a natural part of any journey. Acknowledging our failures is the first step towards healing and growth. Consider this example. I want to play a clip of Seiji, who, if you want to go back to episode 209 of this podcast, he talks a lot about his shame and death, the death of his father, and also, kind of in a way, the death of his old self. Through dealing with shame, he talks about in this clip going into the darkness and acknowledging what shame is. So let's listen to that.
I really wanted to confront my shame. Yeah, which actually lie deep in my emotions. Yeah, I realized that my handle on emotions, especially negative ones, I dealt with in the shadows of shame. And the shadows of shame is where I felt, any negative emotion that I felt, I attributed to shame. I shouldn't be feeling this way.
Ashamed of your shame?
Ashamed of my shame. Wow. It's redundant, but it's true. So whenever I felt hormonal or difficult or very tempted, immediately, like the shame would kick in. And the only way for me to handle it, at least in that moment, was through porn masturbation. Kind of leading me like a self-fulfilling prophecy of like, this is the only way I can handle it. And I realized like, that's so wrong. So I had confronted that and really dealt with it. Like looking at it from the perspective of like God's viewpoint, from like understanding that everything was intended to be beautiful. Like all these negative emotions, like they're negative, but that doesn't mean they're ugly or shameful. Really let me, like, allow me to like dig deep into myself. Like why is it that I'm feeling so like angry in this moment, and actually growing from it. Like that's the beauty. It's really an opportunity for growth rather than letting it control me. So yeah, I mean, that was a huge turning point for me.
What lies in the darkness, right? So even shame, we use that term a lot. There's definitely limitations to the English language and to terminology, but there's a lot of ingredients to shame. And unless you really understand it and how it impacts you and why you would allow yourself to believe in it that's the work, right? Becoming familiar with your enemy. So once we acknowledge our failures, the next step is healing. Healing involves self-compassion, forgiveness, and the support of others, because at the end of the day, grace is the only pathway back to God and to the person that we actually want to be, to living a life where you can actually feel comfortable in your own skin. But that's a two-parter. That's grace through the ethereal God, through experiencing Heavenly Parent's love from nature, from prayer, however it is that you feel it, but also in essence, in substance, through a person that can love you unconditionally. These are essential ingredients to the whole process of healing when you've failed to live up to your ideals. Because a lot of times we are so hard on ourselves that we don't allow ourselves to move on past our mistakes. And so even though we have these ideals, we stay stuck in our failures and we feel further and further and further away from those very ideals that we set. So I really want to talk about the ego, because I think a lot of us don't consider our own egos when it comes to setting goals and having ideals. I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase, but nobody's perfect, right? And yet many of us strive for perfection in some unattainable way, whether we recognize it or not, right? In various aspects of our lives. So this is super dangerous. Perfectionism is very dangerous, especially when it leads us to covering up our mistakes rather than addressing them. You see, the quickest way to fix a mistake is by looking at it, talking about it, addressing it, moving past it. That's the process, is you have to acknowledge it and then you got to work it out. If you've made a mistake that implicates other people, then to talk it out with them. And it can be messy and it's always inconvenient. And it's the last thing your ego wants to do. But when you start to cover things up and you start to justify yourself, this is the road to ruin. So this is where I want to play a clip for you. There is such a great example of somebody who did everything they could to protect their imperfections from the public view. And it resulted in one of the most glorious downfalls. And I don't mean glorious in a good way. I mean spectacular in terms of it was a circus. It was a spectacle. And it was really sad for him, and I'm sure for his family and for his relatives and everything. It is the story of Lance Armstrong. He was the most famous cyclist in the world, rich, married to a rock star, Sheryl Crow, for a while, just had it all. And over the course of a very short while, proceeded to lose everything because he wasn't able to admit that he was less than perfect.
Some breaking news now on Lance Armstrong. The global governing body of cycling has just announced moments ago it will ban Armstrong for life and strip him of his 7 tour titles. ABC's Neil Karlinski joins us now from Seattle with the very latest on this breaking news. Neil.
Amy, that's right. This is it. The UCI Cycling's governing body at that press conference going on in Switzerland right now, officially stripping Armstrong, banning him for life, saying, quote, there is no place in cycling for Lance Armstrong. This was the final hurdle, and it's now really an officially epic downfall. Lance Armstrong turning into a virtual outcast in just a matter of days.
In what looked at times more like a goodbye party than a celebration, Lance Armstrong made 2 appearances at Livestrong's 15th anniversary this weekend, but he didn't concede much.
People ask me a lot, how you doing? And I tell them, I say, well, I've been better, but I've also been worse.
As his reputation, sponsorships, and influence have fallen off a cliff, the silence surrounding his methods over the years has begun to crack. A former competitor testified in this deposition that Armstrong bribed him to throw a race with $1 million prize.
What was the offer?
If my memory serves me right, I think it was $50,000.
Is it fair to say that you were offered money to not challenge Mr. Armstrong to allow him to win?
That's correct.
Armstrong won that race. Former Sports Illustrated reporter Selena Roberts tells a story we heard repeatedly. Whenever a doping question was raised, it was met with threats and intimidation.
I don't think that there is really any politician or celebrity or athlete who has really put together the machinery to, suppress reporting about them like Lance Armstrong has.
Former Bicycling Magazine editor-in-chief Steve Madden writes in a blog, Armstrong exerted a Corleone-like influence in the cycling industry. He could make an advertiser disappear from our pages. Robert says Armstrong and his people tried to turn her into a villain with her bosses and smear her reputation personally when they heard she was investigating doping allegations. And she says Livestrong was never far from the surface, something others have referred to as his cancer shield.
You're confronted with the sort of the perception that if you're not pro-Lance, then absurdly you're pro-cancer.
A pile of multi-million-dollar lawsuits are coming next, and he'll also likely have to return millions more in prize money. The trouble just keeps on coming for Lance. Amy?
Yes, so many new allegations. Neil Karlinski, thanks so much.
But he was out there all weekend. Okay, Amy, thanks very much.
Winston Churchill once said, "Success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." Continue not as is in the status quo after you've made a mistake. Continue means to keep on pursuing after your ideals, even when you fall short. And oftentimes that involves us admitting that we've made a giant mistake and having the courage to say that to ourselves, to God, and out loud to the world around us. And that is the only way, actually, that you can cut free from the shackles of your mistake. And when that mistake becomes a life lesson, it becomes an asset rather than a liability in your life. We're going through a very interesting time in our society right now when, of course, things are falling apart, but nobody wants to take responsibility for it. There's very few people that can even admit that they're a part of the problem. Let's take politicians, for example. It's no secret that many politicians struggle with sexual integrity and a plethora of other shortcomings. But instead of taking accountability, they instead just focus on their opponents and what's wrong with them. And so we can't have an honest conversation, even as a society, about the shortcomings of a political point of view or on anything. We're very polarized because neither side can admit when it's wrong. And so you have people who are clearly not perfect, projecting the fact that all the problems belong to the other, not them, the other. And this is both on a micro level and it's manifesting on a societal level. You can see this in religions as well. There are a growing number of people who are becoming disillusioned with religion, largely due to the fact that religions have a hard time taking responsibility for their mistakes. They all propose a very lofty set of ideals, but pretty much impossible to achieve, especially all at once. So when there's no space to talk about the dissonance or the gap between the ideals and the reality, then people are forced to either pretend like the reality doesn't exist and ignore the problems, just focus on the ideals, or just focus on the problems and kind of reject the ideals, thus walking away from religion. I'm going to play for you another AI rendition of a voiceover. And this is from the Apostle Paul, who's talking to the Philippians in the book of Philippians. And he's encouraging them to understand that this whole growth thing, becoming more like Jesus, is an iterative process. It doesn't happen all at once. And in fact, he's not even close. If you listen to his words, he's saying, I'm a work in progress. So let's listen to AI and hear what it has to say to us.
Not that I have already obtained all this, or have already been made perfect, but I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. Brothers, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it. But one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. All of us who are mature should take such a view of things. And if on some point you think differently, that too God will make clear to you. Only let us live up to what we have already attained.
So here in this quote, Paul is admitting that he's not perfect. He's got flaws. He's a work in process. That, for most people, is a shameful thing to admit. But instead, it's showing true leadership. And it's the leadership that this world and our movement is in dire need of. And that is somebody who can admit that ideals are beautiful and to strive for them, but to also admit, I'm not there yet. I'm working on it. This is called iteration. We want to see progress as an iterative process, as something that is step by step. I'm getting better. Maybe you have bad days, but on the whole, my trajectory is on the uptick. That is super rewarding, and it's the only way that you can actually reclaim your life. Because when things go awry, we often have our perfectionism kick in, and it wants to tell the ego to either hate yourself or to deny reality. And there's no growth in that. It's only through iteration. And I want to use a metaphor here. We often talk about gardens in another way. We talk about purity as being a garden, but your ideals could also be a garden. Imagine you have a big property with a giant backyard, and where there once might have been growth, there's nothing but death. There's just rot and disease in terms of like there's weeds everywhere. Maybe there's a bench somewhere over there. There's a statue. The statue's missing its head. It's got mold on it. The bench is half sunk into the ground. It's just disgusting. It's very uninspiring. Every time you go out there, you're just kind of waiting for some Harry Potter level spider to crawl out and eat you, or some ghost to greet you. And in this situation, most people would just kick the can down the road and say, well, I don't know. I don't see that. I don't want to look at that. It's too much. I'm just not going to go out into my backyard. But in this metaphor, what I'm suggesting is that you stop and you look and you admit to yourself that this garden is not what you want it to be, but that it can be the beautiful garden that you know it is destined to be. And that is a process of sometimes grief, sometimes sadness, but letting it pass through you in order to make way for genuine enthusiasm. And that's where the process starts, right there in the very real mess that you were a part of making. That's where you will start to have a sense of healing, a sense of wonderment come over you, where you can start to look at that corner, look at that bench and start to say, hey, wait a second. I remember that bench is beautiful, and you can think about restoring that bench or getting a new bench and to plant that in the same place or a different place. And then this starts giving you a new energy, and you start to envision a new garden. And you cannot fix your garden in a day or a week. It takes time. And here's the other thing is, even if you have a very clear vision of what you want the garden to be, somewhere along the way, things are going to change. You want to move a plant here. You're going to want to move a bench there. It's okay. But it's a step-by-step process. And the more that you have give and take with this idea of a new garden and building this new garden, the more inspiration you get, the more energy you get in order to create exactly what's in your mind and in your heart. This is where High Noon comes in. You see, we view growth in terms of seasons. We've always worked in a quarterly system. We now officially call our quarters cycles. And so we never ask a person to look at fixing every one of their problems in a week or anything like that. Honestly speaking, some people come to us with those expectations. They think if I join a program, I'll most likely just fix myself real quick and then I can just check out and never come back again, because they have a very naive view of what they're actually contending with. This is a multi-layered process. You don't even understand why you do the things that you do, so it takes time. And that's why we think in terms of with the Ascend program, we think in terms of 3 months. With the Core and the Radiant programs, those are in terms of 6 weeks for now, right? That's the way that we look. And it's about seeing a vision for yourself in that time period. So at the end of 3 months, this is who I would like to be. And you start optimizing your life for that. So if it's somebody who's much more honest and reliable to your word, then it's practicing that and it won't feel natural at first. There's somebody that said, do you mean fake it till you make it? And that's not at all what I mean. What I mean is feel it until you reel it. That means if you only know disappointment, you can't know what something else feels like until you start trying to feel that feeling. So what would be the opposite of disappointment in yourself? I guess would be loving yourself. So how do you practice it? Well, try to feel love for yourself. Open your mind up, open your heart up through prayer. Open yourself up to compliments from other people. And little by little, what you're doing is you're feeling it until it's real. Because even true parents acknowledge that although we want world peace to happen overnight, it's likely going to take generations. It's going to be an iterative process of giving the best of yourself to your kids and teaching them how you learned, what you learned. And it's also going to require them to take that baton willingly and pass that on to the next generation. And if we continue to do this, we will be purifying our lineage through action, through thoughts, through intentionality, and our world will become more peaceful. It doesn't just happen through some magical rain that washes over us. I want to give you some practical examples so that you can work off of these. One is, of course, physical fitness. It's a very easy metaphor to work off of. So if you're really out of shape, like you walk a block and you feel like you're going to vomit because your lungs are working so hard or what have you, you can't just say, okay, I'm going to get fit and expect that is going to be an overnight thing. It's clearly going to take time. And the magic of that, if you're really in it for the long term, to actually find out what health looks like, vibrance, vitality. If you want to understand what vitality looks like, then it will be a month-long, year-long, multiple year-long process of getting better and better at finding the right foods for you, the right exercises for you, and that evolves. It changes. And the more that you age, the more that you have to change the game plan on how you eat, what you eat, when you eat, how much you sleep. It all changes. And what this does is it's a gift from God that allows us access to find the custom best version of ourselves. That's never set it and forget it. It's not a one-time thing. It's a continual give and take with understanding what we need in order to thrive. The same thing is true about sexual integrity with building a life of fulfillment. That's the goal here with High Noon, is the opposite of addiction is connection. The opposite of running away from yourself is being a fulfilled person who loves themselves even when they've made a mistake. Now, in order to understand what the fulfilled version of you does in times of crisis, also in times of joy, is going to be a process of having a vision, practicing that vision, learning from it, and iterating. And if you're in the Ascend program, that's every 90 days, you're working on a new idea of what is the fulfilled version of you and how do they live? How do they wake up? How much do they exercise? How much do they connect with friends? How much time do they spend in prayer? When do they pray? These are all questions that shouldn't be a burden. They should be an opportunity for you to customize a life that is super intentional. And when you start doing that, what you're doing is building yourself up into the person that you have chosen to become.
1, 2, 3, 4.
This is exactly why we need ideals. Because when we don't have ideals, figuring out who your fulfilled self is impossible. You'll always be grabbing in the dark. You'll be lost in a fog of marketing and other people telling you who you should be, but it won't be based off of the timeless assertions of true ideals. Ideals are the things that become like the skeletal structure of our lives, and building our true fulfilled self is like putting the muscle and the meat on top of that skeleton. That's what fleshes out our journey called life. You need both. You need to have ideals and a vision of who you want to be in those ideals. And that makes you a force to be reckoned with in this world. I hope this episode was helpful. I tried to create a new approach to explaining topics that I view are super important. And in this one, we went into ideals, what they are, how to use them to your advantage, and why they're important. So I just want to say thank you so much for listening. This was an experiment. If you enjoyed this format, please let me know. If you have any suggestions, please let me know. I never do any of this for myself. It's always in service of the message getting to the people. So thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.
Yeah.